Welcome to the Connonrs Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. Our next guest is Sebastian Gorka, Fox National Security Advisor and author of the book, Why We Fight. Welcome to Connonrs Corner, Dr. Gorka.
Thanks for having me.
What's the story behind your book?
Well, it's an analysis. My first book was Defeating Jihad, which looked at groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Now I do the whole picture. I look at all the threats we face, not just jihadism, but Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and what the president's doing to defeat them. And then I intersperse that with stories of great American heroes going right back to the Barbary Wars, through World War II, Vietnam, and then Whittaker Chambers, a real hero of the Cold War. And it's just meant to reinstill in us the understanding that we are the greatest nation on God's earth, and the fights that we have fought and how we need to defeat our new enemies.
I like the fact that you're bringing up maybe almost forgotten heroes of America. Like, can you just explain briefly to the audience, Stephen Decatur, who was he?
Yeah, so this is an amazing story. So Stephen Decatur was and still is the most famous, the youngest captain in the U.S. Navy. Not long after our nation was founded, we had our ships were being attacked, taken hostage. Our sailors were being enslaved by the states of North Africa. And President Jefferson said, enough. He helped build our first Navy. And then he deployed Stephen Decatur as a young officer all the way to, it's that region, there's that line in the Marine Corps anthem, the shores of Tripoli. And he led a team of 20 Marines to capture or recapture one of our vessels that had been taken by the Barbary Pirates. And he successfully led that mission, snuck into the harbor of Tripoli, snuck out again. And as a result, by the time he got back home after his arduous journey, the president, the then president of the United States, made him the youngest captain in U.S. history. And the lesson there is not only bravery and heroism, but we have been at war with the jihadis from long before 9/11. It started almost 200 years ago.
I think a lot of people don't even consider that or think about it. Of course, in America, we're not the best at following history, but the Barbary Pirates, who were they?
The Barbary Pirates, or the Barbary Corsairs, were individuals who patrolled the Mediterranean. And once we became independent from the United Kingdom, we lost all the protection of the British Navy, and they decided to take our ships, to capture them, to enslave our sailors and our civilians. And these were nations that demanded from America, this is the incredible story, for the first few years of our existence, they demanded that America pay a tribute, like an annual ransom to these states to stop them doing further damage to our trade. And eventually, President Jefferson said, no, we're not going to do this anymore, and we're going to take our people back. So the Barbary Pirates can be considered to be the first ever Muslim jihadi threat group that we faced as a nation.
And then your other heroes, you start to go into the 20th century. Chesty Puller, who was he?
Chesty Puller, an absolute legend in the Marine Corps, a man who tried to enroll, tried to leave home and lie about his age to join the Army at the age 16. He failed. Later, with his mother's permission, he joined the Marine Corps, served abroad on numerous missions with the Marine Corps. Then he was deployed to Guadalcanal in World War II. And with a small Marine unit, he held Henderson Field, an airfield that was crucial to the Japanese. He was surrounded by Japanese forces with no reinforcements, and through his incredible leadership of those brave Marines, fought for 3 days to maintain that airfield. And that airfield, the maintenance of that airfield, was crucial to our island hopping strategy in the Asia Pacific, and it turned the war around for America against Tojo's forces. So an absolute testament to leadership in battle. And that's why even today, if you go to Camp Lejeune, if you go to Quantico, when they're calling out those cadences for the Marines running around those bases, they still call out those cadences to Chesty Puller.
Red McDaniel.
Wow, Red McDaniel. I had the honor of meeting Eugene McDaniel. He's still alive. He was a naval aviator in Vietnam. was just about to be sent home after completing almost 40 combat missions over Vietnam. But then he was shot down, and he hid in the jungle, evading his enemy forces that were looking for him, but unfortunately was eventually captured. And this naval aviator spent 6.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton, a man who was tortured repeatedly, but who never lost faith in God, never lost faith in his country, an individual who helped to maintain the morale. He became a kind of minister, a kind of a faith leader to his fellow Americans in that prisoner of war camp, took the blame for those who had tried to escape from the camp and was repeatedly tortured on their behalf. But an amazing story. Finally, he was released after 6.5 years, returned to service, returned to uniform, and was then given his own ship to command by the U.S. Navy, another great unsung hero from American history.
You know, one of the things that, going through your book, I had forgotten the cruelty of the North Vietnamese, in their prisoners. I mean, I wouldn't say I've forgotten it, but I think we need to be reminded.
Yeah, it's really quite, it's perhaps the toughest chapter in the book to read, and it was a tough one to write. It's clear, and I read his autobiography, I met the man himself. These were people who didn't torture you for their job just because they were told to do so. These were people who clearly enjoyed what they were doing to their fellow man, who they considered not to be their fellow man. And the sport-like quality, there's one passage in it where he recounts how when they were bored of torturing other humans, they would douse the rats that were running around the prison camp in fuel oil, and then set them alight, and then laugh and get entertained as the rats ran around with their fur on fire until they died. So, yeah, man's inhumanity to man knew no bounds when it came to the Vietnam War.
Now, our dog lovers might be upset with the North Vietnamese also.
Yeah, they beat the dogs. For sport, they beat the dogs. They chased them until they became so tired that they died from exhaustion. And why did they do that? Because they'd eat the dogs, and they thought, or they believed, that that's how you tenderize the meat. If the dog died from exhaustion, that made the meat even better. So, yeah, it's a different world.
Right. And some people get criticized what they did at the CIA. Whittaker Chambers. Now, he's a little bit more controversial. I mean, the other guys are all heroes, and I think most of would accept that. But, even into the 60s and 70s, a lot of people, and I know people saying out there, who is Whittaker Chambers? So maybe you can start with that.
Yeah, there's a reason he's in the book. I believe he's a hero, although he never wore a uniform, never carried a badge or a gun. And he's in there because he's Judge Kavanaugh before Judge Kavanaugh. So Whittaker Chambers, who wrote the incredible book Witness, was a hardcore communist. So much so that before the war, he was a covert agent of Moscow. He was the individual who smuggled the communications between the Kremlin and the Soviet Union's covert assets inside the U.S. government. During World War II, he broke with Moscow. He was shocked after Stalin made his non-aggression pact with Hitler, and fearing for his life, he went underground with his family. After the war, he found God. He realized the error of his ways. He became a patriot. And he realized, I have lots of information about bad guys who are still very influential, either in government or in the policy elite in Washington or New York. I need to tell somebody. He tried to tell the FBI. They weren't interested. He tried to tell the Truman White House. They weren't interested. Eventually, he tells Congress. And Congress, especially in the personage of a very young Richard Nixon, says, okay, tell us everything you know. And he participates in the first ever televised testimony of its kind, in which he stands up and he says, I know who the communist subversives are, and they include people like Alger Hiss. And this is where the controversy begins, because Alger Hiss was a champion, a darling of the Democrats, a favorite of the Democrat Party and the left. And when he said, look, I've got the evidence on this man. I was the courier when he was in the State Department between him and the Kremlin. Alger Hiss denied it. He denied even meeting this man until Whittaker Chambers provided the microfilm photographs of the documents that Alger Hiss, the government confidential documents Alger Hiss had given him to smuggle out to the Soviets. The thing about the Chambers case is that the dirty tricks used against him were absolutely unspeakable. The Democrat Party, the left, accused him of being a homosexual, an alcoholic. They accused him of being responsible for his brother's death, only to be vindicated after he died. There was the declassification of the Venona decrypts of Soviet intelligence communications, which proved Alger Hiss had in fact been a Soviet agent. So Whittaker Chambers was a man who was smeared, but who never surrendered, stood up for the truth, and suffered a fate, at least in terms of his public attacks, very, very similar to Associate Justice Kavanaugh.
And listen, thank you for bringing his name out again, because he has been forgotten, and the sacrifice was tremendous.
Right.
And what he did for this country, again, you're bringing it up, so thank you for bringing it up. Obviously, we're in wars right now. Do you have confidence in the Trump administration?
I do, and I know it for a fact. I can tell you, I think it was the second month of the administration. I was in the White House, and we had a JSOC officer who was on detail to the NSC. That's the top of the top when it comes to our special operations guys. And he recognized me, and he came up to me, and he just said, look, I'm here on detail, but my buddies who are in theater, fighting the bad guys, fighting ISIS, fighting Al-Qaeda, I need you to know how their morale has skyrocketed, simply because they know that now they have a commander-in-chief who wants to win and who has their back. And if you look at just ISIS alone, Obama had told us, if you recall, that ISIS is a generational threat. We're just going to have to live with it. Really?
They were JV
Donald
first.
Trump. JV,
yes.
Exactly. And then they became a generational threat we're just going to have to get used to. Well, it seems as if Donald Trump has managed to condense a generation into a few months, because we, with our armed forces, once Donald Trump unleashed them, we destroyed the caliphate of the Islamic State in less than 5 months. That's what having a will to win really is. And that's why I called my book, Why We Fight.
Okay, so the name of the book, Why We Fight, Defeating America's Enemies with No Apologies. Dr. Sebastian Gorka, thank you for being on Connonrs Corner.
My pleasure. Anytime. God bless.